Now, Malcom Quinn is the proprietor and founder of a business called 13 Management. Now, that's an event management business. It does lots of things, but right now it's doing around 50 events across Australia regionally and looking after News Limited's regional advertising customers. It's a big deal. It's a very good business.
We're going to touch on the things that, the path that I took after I left school and how I found myself living in an area of the world that I never thought I was going to be. I worked for some big businesses in the newspaper game, then ended up with a $46,000 inheritance from my grandmother, which was a sliding door moment in my life. I thought that's the most amount of money I'm ever going to have. What can I do with that? So I started my own newspaper group, sold that once, did another one, sold that again.
Really what he's doing is he's a customer retention expert. And it's funny, when he was 16 he didn't realise, but he had a skill of getting customers and retaining customers in a good old-fashioned way. But it works no matter what modern business you do today. So if you want to hear more about this, come listen to me, Mark Boris at The Mentor on podcast1.com.au. Malcom Quinn, welcome to The Mentor.
G'day, Mark. How you going?
Good to see you again.
Yes, definitely.
Last time I saw you was what year?
2016.
And remind me, where did we do that? Because I did something through your event management business.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so we did a function together in Hervey Bay.
Yeah, and what do you remember what I spoke about?
Well, success in business.
Success in business.
You were talking about it then.
It was a good turn up, as I recall.
350, I think.
Was that some sort of club or something like that?
Yeah. So one of the clubs that I do that brings local business people together to hear positive messages, and we don't normally have business speakers. Normally we have what we term entertainers. But in your case, obviously at that stage you're a celebrity apprentice. It was very, very topical. It fitted really well.
I remember the discussion with my talent manager, so-called, I'm the so-called talent in inverted commas. He told me exactly that. They don't normally get people like you. They normally get entertainers up there. But so I try to make it as entertaining as possible. And I seem to recall that I'd had a pretty bad injury, which wasn't all that entertaining for me from that point of view. But we'll leave that for another discussion. Now, mate.
Yes.
You've got what I didn't realise at that time is that you have quite an incredible story. And, you're a newspaper guy. Would you
I would say... I'd say,
one stage.
Well, it's still my passion. I'd say I'm a career newspaper guy.
And what does that mean?
Well, it means that that's what really got me into the workforce. I'm in proper workforce.
Take me back. You're a youngster now. You're probably in your mid-40s. Take me right back to the day when you first started work. This is an old school story.
Yeah, well, it's a bit of happenstance, really. I dropped out of school the second week of...
Where were you? Which part of Australia?
Oh, okay. So I grew up in Brisbane, on the north side of Brisbane in a place called Albany Creek. So back in the 80s, there was nothing there. Really just bushland and stuff like that. So primary school and high school there.
What did your parents do?
Just average working class people. My dad was a courier driver for a company called Ward's Express, which of course is well gone now. My mum was a nurse, career nurse, worked in hospitals and then in senior care and things like that. So we're just an average family. Went to primary school there, high school there. Awful student, like really bad. I really struggled. The further I got into high school, the more I struggled to understand what are the things that I'm learning now going to practically apply as I get older.
It's made you even thought about it. I never thought about shit like that. What did you really think? Did you actually sit down and think, why am I doing this stuff?
Yeah.
It's pretty smart in those days.
Well, I don't know. Well, it's interesting that you say that because now the buzzword that they put around all this stuff is emotional intelligence, but that's not what it was back then, you see. It
wasn't called that then?
No. But
you were called a rebel?
No, I was called a smart-ass kid. That's what I was called because even as a child I enjoyed the company of adults more than I did of kids my own age and enjoyed sort of interacting with them and talking to them. And by the time I'd finished my junior school certificate, I really didn't want to go back to school, but I did. I went back for 2 weeks.
That's 15?
Yeah.
In those days, yeah.
Yeah. So 2 weeks into grade 11, I managed to convince my parents that me continuing my schooling didn't represent a value proposition for me or the teachers, whom I wasn't their darling. So I just dropped out of school.
It's sort of an interesting discussion, to be honest with you. Like lots of parents were listening to this, and lots of parents, we keep getting fed this stuff about ADHD and, ADD as well, and all the various sort of variations of kids not being able to concentrate in class or why a kid is disruptive. And, we are looking at the suitability of the curriculum, what is the practicality of it? And you're saying that back in those days, if you were that type of person, to some extent you were ostracised. If there was that type of kid, you're ostracised as being naughty kid or someone who can't concentrate, or they didn't know about ADHD in those days, but you're more like rebellious or just a naughty kid.
I think so. And I think it was easier for the teachers to rationalise that as he's just a troublemaker.
Yeah.
As opposed to he doesn't really fit in here, or there's not a box for him.
So when you say troublemaker, did you what sort of school was it? State school?
State school, yeah.
So I know what happened to me. I went to Catholic school and used to cop it big time. Like you get the strap and all sorts of weird stuff. And naughty for me, bad kid for me in my days was fighting blokes and stuff like that. Were you doing that sort of stuff? Were you just disruptive in class?
Just disruptive. And I think disruptive is another way to describe it.
You weren't stealing cars and stuff?
No, goodness, no.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that. A couple of blokes, my mates stole cars at school.
No. But ask a lot of questions, and then ask questions about the answers. And
sorry to interrupt, Malcolm, but I just remember when I better be careful what I say. I guess the statute of limitations applies. But when I was at high school, a bloke who I know, one of my friends at school at the time, drove a stolen car to school for 3 months. It was a Catholic school in Bankstown. And it's amazing, like today you'd never get away with that sort of stuff. But I remember getting a lift with him in some respects. Like some days he'd pick me up from Bankstown station, because I used to go from Punchbowl to Bankstown on the train. And he'd pick me up from Bankstown, and it was funny, oblivious to it. And he's a very respectable guy in our family. Yep. He's a school teacher. He's actually a school teacher. It's amazing the sort of stuff that happened when we were kids.
Oh, look, I think we're all different people now with the benefit of hindsight. But, look, I've fractured the odd law in my time, but now's probably not the forum for that.
But it's funny, though, we talk about, where you are today and the sort of decisions you made at 15. And it's when I think back at some of the things that I saw around me in my school, and some of the things I sort of participated in. I didn't actually steal a car, but I actually had the benefit of getting driven around in it. I never thought for a second that I was doing anything really bad. And that particular individual went on to become a school teacher, and quite a well-respected school teacher today. Nice family man, etc. It's funny how some of the decisions we make when we're 15, I made my decisions to get in the car without thinking, but you're saying to me that at your age of 15, you made a decision not to continue on to school because you didn't think it suited you, or you didn't suit it either.
No, definitely not.
That's crazy. That's quite a mature thought process for a kid who's probably not suited for school. That's very mature. I think it's mature anyway. I can't imagine many people back in those days would have thought that way.
I just wanted to be gone. I just wanted to get on with the next stage of my life, which was become a fully fledged adult, which ironically I found out within the next 6 months that I definitely wasn't a fully fledged adult.
Yeah, that takes time.
It certainly does.
So what did you do? You went and said to your mum and dad, listen, after 2 weeks into year 11, which if I go right back in those days, it was called fifth form and sixth form, which is a bit scary. And you said, listen, this is not my go.
Correct.
How did they take it?
It took a couple of goes, as these things do. But, I can't recall the exact conversation that I had with them, but I talked them through, my results aren't good. So what am I going to do? And I might as well get out and start earning, because I'm not learning. And it just wasn't the space for me. I was just going to bob up and down for the next 2 years. And if I continued to do that, then I probably would find myself getting into more trouble than on what I was maybe just challenging adults intellectually, which, they didn't like very much. And so that's what sort of put me into that bracket of being the pain in the ass kid that nobody wanted to hang around with.
How dare you challenge a teacher or a concept the teacher's trying to profess. So what did you do? So your mum and dad had conceded?
Yeah,
and what
so
happened?
They've conceded. So they said, you've got to go down to the CES. I don't know if any of your listeners remember what the CES was.
Well, it's where you go, Commonwealth Employment Service. Yeah. It's where you go and try and get the dole.
Yeah.
Or they put you in a job.
But there was no dole. There's no question. You're going to go out and get a job. So I remember going there for the first time, and they, no computers, mind you. So they put all the cards up on a little stand, and you'd go and pick a card for a job that you think you might be suitable for, and you'd go and sit down at the desk, and then they'd ring up the person and see whether they'd be interested in having a chat to you. And the first one I picked up was for lawn mowing. I thought, well, I don't have a lot of practical skills, so maybe that'll be okay, So I got that job, and I went and did it, and I lasted 2 days. That was too hard work for me, and I'll admit that. And it was hot, and with my complexion, that was never going to be a career.
Yeah, for those who are listening, because you can't see, Malcolm's a redhead.
Correct. So it probably wasn't the wisest decision that I made. And then essentially after that, I just bummed around for a couple of months, and I really didn't do anything. And my friends are at school, and so I'd become quite, interested in daytime television and things like that. And until it got to a point where my parents said, look, okay, enough's enough. You either got to go back to school.
Or get an apprenticeship.
Or,
did they put that one on you?
No, well, my wife would attest to the fact that if I try to change a light bulb, we've got to call an electrician to fix the damage. So they said, well, why don't you go and spend some time with your grandparents? And they lived in this, I call it a half a horse town called Glen Innes in New South Wales.
Know it, yep.
Very cold place. So why don't you go and spend some time with them, which I think my parents at that point in time were using a little bit of reverse psychology on me. Like, if you go in there for a couple of months, you're going to hate it so much, you're going to come back here and you're going to want to re-inject yourself back into the social life that you once had. It actually had the complete opposite effect on me. So I went down there, and they were, at that stage, they would have been in their 70s. So there was those two and me, a 15-year-old kid. And we just hung out, and, I really enjoyed their company. And there were things to do in Glen Innes that you couldn't do in the suburbs of Brisbane. So I could go fishing every day, and rugby league has always been a great passion of mine. So I'd go and watch the Glen Innes Magpies play at the spiritual home of rugby league in Glen Innes called Mead Park. I remember this. It was one particular cold August afternoon. It was the 21st of August 1988, and I went to watch the Glen Innes Magpies play the Moree Boomerangs, who, let's just say, they'd prefer to beat you 52-50 than they would 6-0. So fantastically entertaining. It was a great afternoon, and it was really buoyant. So I decided to walk home, even though it was freezing cold. I walked in the back door, went to the fridge, got a drink. I remember it like it was yesterday. And as I turned from the fridge with a glass of Fanta in a little pink crystallised old 70s cup, my uncle was standing there, and they lived next door, my uncle and auntie, and he said to me, I hate to tell you this, but your father's died today. And in a moment, my life changed.
Did you know he was dying?
No. Well, no.
He just dropped dead of a heart attack or something, did he?
He dropped dead of a heart attack, crossing the street to buy an ice cream a week after his 50th birthday. Completely out of the blue. So that was a real shock to me at the time. It wasn't until I became much older that I actually comprehended the impact of it. But on the spot, his reflexes were fast enough to catch the drink that I dropped, and I thought, wow, oh my goodness, and within a moment, I think I went from a child to an adult. All the safety nets that I subconsciously had, even though I thought, oh, look at how smart am I at my age, were just gone. So that was a real wake-up call for me. And as a result of that, my mum, who was now living in Brisbane on her own because her husband had died, she grew up in Glen Innes. So she wanted to move back there. So my 2-month holiday in Glen Innes now became permanent.
So you're really a New South Wales resident, which means you should go for the blues.
No.
No? Okay, we'll move on.
Let's move on. So I found myself now full-time living in Glen Innes, which I thought was going to be a little bit of a holiday, but it wasn't. And my mum really struggled. She really struggled, obviously, with the suddenness of it, and she suffered some issues as a result of that. So that support network kind of wasn't there either. So I thought, oh my goodness, what am I going to do?
You have started earning a quid because you're now let's call it in those days, at least the man of the house.
In many ways, yeah. So I saw an ad in the paper for for a junior advertising sales consultant at the local newspaper, which is called the Glen Innes Examiner, which it still is, and published twice a week, doing 2,500 copies paid on a Tuesday and a Thursday. And I thought, well, that sounds like me. I'm going to go and give that a go. And it was, this would have been around sort of October of that year, so a few months after he'd passed, and right about the time that every kid in Glen Innes who was finishing high school with a Year 12 degree, or whatever they called it back in those days, was also looking for a job in a town where there were no jobs. So I remember going to the interview, and the regional manager came over from another town called Inverell, which is a bigger town, a full-horse town, not a half-horse town, 45 minutes away. And she came over to interview me and a stack of other kids on this particular day. And so we went through the normal, processes of an interview. And we got to the end. And I remember saying to her just before, the interview finished, that if you're going to pick someone who stands out on paper as the most academically suitable candidate, then there's no point in phoning me because I won't be getting the job. But if you're going to employ the person who's interviewed the best today, then I expect I'll be hearing from you. And I did. So she gave me the job. And, what did I know about selling advertising to, clients for a newspaper? Absolutely nothing. I knew nothing. So I started on the Monday.
Well, you knew enough to get into the head.
Well, I thought, you know what it's like. You look for what's my opportunity, what's my in here, and I can fake the rest until I figure it out. So I got in there, and I started on the Monday, and they sent me out on the Monday to start selling ads. And I didn't know anything about anything, and product knowledge training wasn't the greatest, should I say. So I sold my first ad ever to a bakery, which was in the same street. It was a really old bakery. It was called Smeaton's Bakery. And I thought, I can't just go in there and say, hi, I'm Malcolm, the kid from the paper, and do you want to buy an ad in a paper in a town where everybody knows you are anyway? So I thought, well, what's my in here? So I went there and I said to them, I've got a new slogan for you. And they thought, oh, really? Everybody knows us. Why do we need a new slogan? I said, how about if it's not a Smeaton, it's not worth eating? So they bought the ad, and then another one, and then another one. I thought, how easy is this? And I think that's where I just absolutely loved it. Like the art of the sale, the conversation around the sale, the skills that I always thought that I had around identifying the nuances of human behaviour and how to identify what the push points are going to be for you and hone in on those and those sorts of things.
If it's not a Smeaton, it's not worth eating. I like that.
It's not a Smeaton, it's not worth eating, yeah.
And the old days of...
which is just a basic pie.
I mean, like some of our greatest advertisers, and if I go back to Alan Morris and those guys, the Mojo guys, what they were always famous for was those two-liners.
Yeah.
That's nothing else. It's the two-liners. I mean, it's probably a bit different today, but back in those days, World Series cricket, sure. Cornell and all those people, they're great for the two-liners, and the two-liners wins people over straight away.
Well, and you've got to put that into perspective in terms of the period in time that we're talking about. I mean, those traditional medias now, which are, under pressure from a lot of different areas, were the main game. Yeah. So print, TV and radio was it. And you really got good cut-through if you're able to come up with something like that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, our most famous advertisers are not necessarily the real big agencies today, but they're the ones who come up, the individuals who are the most famous are the ones who come up with those little quick sayings or little jingles.
That top-of-mind awareness that comes from going, yeah, I know that thing. Yeah, that's the jingle for that thing.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and to me, that's not something you can train people for. That's like an innate skill. That's something you have inside you. Like, I wouldn't have never come up with something like that when I was 16 or 17. No way. But I wouldn't have even thought of it. But it's something you're sort of born with. It's not something you train up to.
I think you're 100% right. Some of the things that we're taught, we try to digest. It doesn't. If you don't have it, you don't have it.
Yeah.
So go and do something else. Probably why I ended up spending, the best part of my working life now in that particular career.
So where did you go from there, Malcolm? You're selling advertising and at this stage you're living in Glen Innes with your mum, your grandma and your grandpa and your uncle and auntie next door.
Correct.
So
and my brother, he was there too.
You got like some sort of support group around you, but to some extent you're missing your dad. So the finances are looking a bit tricky. So what you do next?
Well, I was in a system, I suppose, because the paper was owned by Rural Press in those days. So I was in a system, so I had access to training and stuff like that, and access to career advancement. So I went from there back to Ipswich, to the newspaper in Ipswich called the Ipswich Advertiser, so they gave me the sales manager's job there, which was crazy. And I'm not sure how, this would have been late 1990s, I suppose. Oh, early 1990s, sorry, I should say. And then I just took every job that came my way, or every opportunity for advancement that came my way. So then I went to Rockhampton, a newspaper called the Capricorn Local News. They made me the general manager of that paper. Then I went back to Ipswich from Rockhampton, and they made me the sales director of the
Can
daily
I just stop there?
paper.
Because that's a really important point to raise here. When you're looking for a job, well, not when you're looking for anyone looking for a job, but when you're considering a career, one of the great things is the ability to transfer and to travel. And I don't mean travelling as such, but I mean being able to, like Rural Press had operations everywhere.
90 papers.
And allows you to go to, as you said, Rockhampton, you can go to Ipswich, you can go down to wherever. You go all over the place, but at each occasion you get a little bit extra experience or a little different experience. You can sort of hop around the place, but as you're hopping around the place, that's why, like people who work for accounting firms, go work for Pricewaterhouse, or go work for PwC, I should say, or go work for these massive organisations who, you don't hop around Australia, but what you do is you go from Sydney to New York and New York to London. You might not get any more money, but what you're doing is you're getting unbelievable experience. So, which is one of the reasons why people like to work for investment banks today. The experience you get from organisations like Rural Press are invaluable when you're sort of moving around, either in your case, the country, Australia, or alternatively, around the world. So people who are looking at advancing their skill base and their experiences should, if you get the opportunity, you never underestimate how valuable it is to work for one of these organisations who has places all around the world you can travel to.
Look, I think the point you make is a great one, but I think there's a little bit more to that as well, and that is that I would have not learnt anything if I went from the Glen Innes Examiner to a cadet's job at, say, the Daily Telegraph. Because when you move around to smaller newspaper sites, you're involved in everything. So you get a sense of how the business runs. You're not siloed into a particular job. So I think sometimes people think, okay, so the bigger the organisation that I can get into immediately, the more successful I'm going to become. I don't think that's true. I think really what you need to be doing is getting into an organisation that diversifies your skill base, if that's the industry you want to be in, so you understand the whole of the business, not just your little part. So I moved around lots of different places. I went back to the Queensland Times newspaper in Ipswich. Then offered me a job with APN in head office in Brisbane, looking after all of the special projects, the special publications across 90 newspapers in their group. So I took that particular job, which I enjoyed for a while. And then around about the year 2000, my grandmother passed away and she left me $46,000 in an inheritance, which at that stage I thought, okay, well, it's because I'm not making big money, I thought, this is the most amount of cash money I'm ever going to see in my lifetime. So what am I going to do? I've made a lot of money for media organisations. How about I make some for myself? So I decided to start my own newspaper in Ipswich with this $46,000.
I want to come back in the second half to how well you invested that $46,000. What do you think were the prerequisites to allow you in skills, and what were those experiences that allowed you to invest that money into whatever it is you decide to invest that money into? And then what happened after that? Okay, I'm back here with Malcom Quinn, and we've just been through sort of what happened in his sort of fairly adventurous life, going from Brisbane or an outer suburb of Brisbane back down to Glen Innes, and then his dad dying at a really early age. And then we fast forward that to him receiving an inheritance of $46,000 from his grandmother back in 2000, which to some people, to be frank with you, that's a lot of dough back in 2000, especially if you've never seen anything like that before in your life. $46,000 is probably a year's wage. And Malcom, at this stage, has been working in the various parts of some of the big newspaper organisations, and I guess radio was part of those organisations too. No, just newspapers. So he's got some good experience. What I want to know is, what the hell did you do with that $46,000, mate, when that landed on your desk? Do you remember the cheque?
I do remember getting the cheque.
And what'd you do with it straight away?
Well, I put it in the bank.
And then what'd you do? No, but do you already have an idea where you're going to invest it?
Oh, 100%, because, it was a little bit protracted. So I knew the money was coming, but, if you've had anything to do with the settlement of estates and things like that, it takes a bit of time.
Totally.
So I had a bit of time to think it all through, and whether, in fact, I was in fact making a really good decision or just a foolish one. But I just didn't want to keep doing what I was doing, and I want to have a red hot crack for myself, and I thought, this is it. This is my opportunity. Ooh, early or mid-20s maybe,
right.
A bit later. Mm-hmm. So I thought, okay. So I figured it out in my head that I'd probably have to spend half of it to get myself set up. So so TV and radio are different. You have to have a license. The barrier to entry to get into newspaper, you don't have to have anyone. Anyone can start a newspaper. So I thought it'll take me about half of that money to set it up. And I can probably publish for 2 or 3 weeks before I run out of money. So how am I going to deal with that? And how am I going to make sure that I don't go out the back door? So I came up with our plans and strategies for that, and we rented a little office up above Brisbane Street in Ipswich. It was a one-room office, and there were 4 or 5 of us working this newspaper. It had inch-thick plush pole carpet on the floor, and I think we paid $100 a week to take this little office, no bigger than this studio. And away we went. So we launched a weekly community newspaper, so free to the home.
What was it called?
It was called Ipswich's Own OWN. And that was a part of the strategy. Part of the strategy was to brand align that with this is your own paper.
Who was your competitor?
Our competitor was APN.
Or was it like a local newspaper though?
Yep. So a daily, and they had the market.
So your competitor was your previous employer?
That's correct, yes. And where I had been working sort of no less than a year ago. So I had intimate knowledge about the marketplace, and they had a daily paper and a community paper. So they had the market share. There's no question about that.
You're talking about the community papers where, it's like chat about what's going on in the area, and the local real estate agents do ads for properties for sale, and there's a trade section at the back where, if you're a plumber or electrician, you put your ads in and all that sort of stuff.
In its traditional form, yes.
Yep.
But not what we were thinking about doing. Because normally in a marketplace where a big media organisation will run a daily paper and a community paper, it's all about the daily paper. So anything that's not newsworthy enough to make it into the daily paper gets thrown into the community and thrown over the fence. But the penetration of the daily paper was nowhere near as high as the circulation of how many you were putting over fences into people's homes. So we reverse engineered that and said, okay, well, even though we're only coming out once a week, a lot of people are not getting this local news content because they're not buying a local newspaper. So instead of filling it with rubbish editorial about, check for this kid or a ribbon for this, well, let's put proper news in there because a lot of people aren't getting access to that. And that proved to be very successful.
Okay, and did you charge for the newspaper?
No,
it's a free
advertising revenue is the only source.
Yeah, and I guess you knew how to do advertising. So what part of the business did you run?
All of it.
All of it.
Everything. I was even writing stories, I was taking photographs, but mainly selling and leveraging relationships that I had in that marketplace already. So when you've only got enough money to put the paper out for a couple of weeks, you're asking clients to pay up front, you're calling favours. When those favours, ran out in that regard, we debt factored for a while with I guess you could probably refer to that as a lender of last repute, things like that, just to keep ourselves going until it really started to turn. So
how long did it take you to start to get revenues in there that could allow you to support yourself?
A year.
How'd you do it? Like for a year, your expenses were greater than your revenues. How'd you do that? I mean, was that your 26?
When you say support yourself, I mean we could
pay the bills.
We could pay the bills.
Yeah.
And I knew we must have been doing something right because I was only getting 80% of the revenue because the debt factor guys keeping 20.
Yeah.
So we were doing okay.
So, you use factoring. So what you're saying is, for people listening to this, you would sell ads to, the local bakery, and the bakery didn't have to pay for those advertising space for a month or something like that.
That's correct.
You gave them 30 days or 90 days.
Which is standard practice because, after you called in the favours from the big advertisers who'd known you for a long time and are happy to see another local business launch and support you, that can only go for a certain period of time. So to keep the cash flow going, we went into debt factoring and stuff like that.
Debt factoring being, you went along to somebody and you said, I'll sell you the debt that's owed to me by the local baker because he hasn't paid me. When the local baker does pay, they pay you, the factoring company, direct, and the factoring company in turn gives you 80% of the money before he gets paid. So in other words, you get paid in advance, and that allows 100%. You to keep the doors open and pay your staff or buy your newspaper, whatever you got, the paper, etc., and pay for the press leasing of the press machines or whatever it is.
All of that sort of stuff. But it didn't take, certainly after a year, well, when we first launched, we weren't very popular with the other newspaper operators in town, that's for sure. And,
so what happened? Like, I mean, it's not easy to take on someone like APN. What happens? What happened to them? How do they respond?
So I'd be working with a couple of guys who are really close to them at local level in Ipswich. And I actually do a keynote presentation about this called Who's Your Andrew? And I got a call one day. This is just before we launched our first edition, and it was from the general manager of the newspaper. And I'm going to say that I feel like he was...
The general manager from your competitor?
Correct. Who... I think was acting on his own. I'd like to think that he was acting on his own. And he invited me to the coffee shop to have a chat. And I thought, this is great, because we're going to have a chat about how we're going to keep this nice and clean. And, we foster local business. We'd like to see you do well. And in reality, you're not going to be much of a threat to us and all that sort of thing. Well, oh my goodness, I could not have been more wrong. I was there first. I always like to be there first for meetings. And he rolls in, sits down across the table from me, takes out, I can't remember whether it was like a phone or a dictaphone or whatever, starts recording the conversation, which I thought this is a little odd. And then pronounces to me that, we're an organisation with a $900 million market capitalisation, and from what I hear, you've got $46,000. You've always been overrated. You're well out of your league. You don't know what you're doing. We're going to financially and personally crush you, and it's going to be a lot of fun to do it. I thought, oh my goodness.
You punch him in the head?
I was completely unprepared for that. But I thought, wow. So I walked out of that meeting, and I thought, if I was not motivated enough to make a success of this business, guess what?
I am now. Because that sort of conversation can go either way, can't it? It can either crush somebody or with the fear of God, and alternatively they respond.
Well, you know what? The only thing that I can't stand is losing. I cannot stand losing. I enjoy winning.
But you hate losing more.
I hate losing more. Oh, my goodness. So I still think about that today. Like in the businesses that I wish that I could find that guy again and say, man, you just did me the biggest. You have no idea the favour that you've done me.
Well, he's probably listening to this podcast, so don't worry.
Yeah,
and he's probably sitting there shrivelling up. It's amazing how sometimes people unwittingly actually inspire you and re-energise you or give you the energy it needs to sort of get through those sort of lumpy periods in a startup business. I mean, I've had the same experience myself at Yellow Brick Road when I first started. So you're saying that this general manager dude, who, as I said, is probably listening to this, looking for inspiration, was a massive inspiration to you and gave you that energy. But it's weird how we get energy from unusual events. But that energy that sort of make it all worth your while, putting up with the shit you have to put up with, trying to make ends meet every week, dealing with factoring companies, and put you in a position to just forge on, just push on, just to prove a point.
100%. And, everything's sweet when it's going well, and you can enjoy the art of the sale and all that sort of thing. But when it's tough, and it's always tough, and it doesn't matter what size business you're in, it's always tough. And it's a full commitment. Sometimes you start to question yourself and self-doubt comes in and all of those sorts of things. And when you've got a pivotal point to go back to and say, what keeps me motivated?
Yeah.
I don't want... And as you said, this can go either way. They can crush you or you can really drive you. And I think that comes down to what your inherent personality is.
And why the fuck am I doing this? I tell you why I'm doing this. I'm doing this so you don't fucking win.
Yeah.
So, that's the bottom line. And what happened? Here we are, we're in Ipswich a year later, or during that period, this bloke's basically tried to stand over you and play that, he probably thought he's out of some sort of movie.
Possibly.
And actually Russell Crowe's playing that role right now. And he puts it on you. It inspires you. So where'd you end up? What? Because I'm guaranteed there's some irony out of all this.
Oh, there's no question about that. So, first year was tough. in business. Second, third, fourth in that marketplace. We just started to take bigger and bigger and bigger chunks of business away from our competitors.
So can you, I mean, would you, is there a, I don't know how these things work in your industry, but I know how it works in my industry, but would you sort of say, you took 20% market share over a period of time? How does that work?
More measured in dollars.
Dollars, is it?
Yeah, more measured.
But in dollars of a percentage of sales revenue for Ipswich or your zone, where would you have been?
We probably took 50% of their market share.
Oh, wow. Okay, so what happens in those situations? I know what happens. Normally happens in banking circles. What happens when you take away from the bank? I know what they normally do. Their normal response is they come in and they either try to spend more money against you, trying to crush you more, or alternatively they try and buy you. What happened?
Well, I think that to use a sporting analogy, once you lose the dressing room, you're finished. So if there's another product in the marketplace that has the hearts and minds of the advertisers, which is what really matters in this instance, once that happens, it's incredibly difficult to get them back. And once they're rusted onto a particular product, you've got two options. You can either shrivel up in the corner and go into the fetal position, cry and say, well, we let this happen because he's come from nowhere, and principally because he wanted to run his business on the basis of what was good for the customers as opposed to what was good for him as a business, and has really damaged us savagely. So the best option is for us to buy that product off him. And
did you know they would do that? Did you think yourself these guys are going to come off and buy this business?
No.
Did you put it up for sale?
No.
So how did that happen?
No.
Did the general manager come back and see you and say, listen, I've made a mistake?
No. Any business that I've ever owned, I'm never on sale, but I'm always ready to be bought. And I think that that's a really important point.
So you're ready for sale. That's always. A really important. By the way, for those people in business who are listening to this, I harp on about this all the time, always be ready for sale. Always.
Yep. So they came to me and they made me an offer.
How many years later?
This would have been 2006.
So 6 years after you kicked off?
5 or 6 years later. Yeah. 5 or 6 years later.
How much money did they pay you?
Well, it's an interesting. Well, I'll tell you a really quick story. So APN came to me and they offered me an amount of money to buy the paper off me. We did an arrangement with them, and right at the last minute, for reasons unknown, they decided that they wanted to renegotiate with me. And I thought, this is very strange. Why would you want to do that? At exactly the same time, News Limited got wind of it and came to me with a substantially higher offer, which I took. And I still consult to News today, and they're a fantastic organisation.
So News bought you in the end?
News bought it in the end.
Because News were trying to open up into all the regional local papers. And they still, today I think they dominate, don't they?
Very much so. Yeah. And that's principally what through one of my consulting roles, look after regional newspaper stuff for News Corp. But yeah, News came in. So $46,000 startup, about $6.5 million, I think the deal was.
That's a lot of money back then.
Yeah,
and that's a pretty good rags to riches sort of story. You invested your grandma's inheritance or your inheritance from your grandmother very well. She'd be quite proud of you. And you sold it for $6.5 million. And did News say to you, we want to keep you on?
Yeah. So I stayed on with News. Well, they wanted to keep me on for a while, but I think I'd been working for myself for too long, and I wasn't mature enough to go back into a corporate environment. So I only lasted 3 months and left.
Do you still do work for News Limited now?
Yes, very much so.
So what are you doing now?
So now I look after a lot of programs for them in relation to client acquisition and retention. So that's really my main role in the regional newspaper.
In regional newspapers, yeah. So I know they're big in regional newspapers. So effectively, what you're saying you do, one of your roles is to go and make sure that the advertisers, who are your clients, who are in local areas, let's call it the baker. Let's keep talking about the baker.
Yeah.
The baker's happy because News Limited don't want to lose that baker as a customer, because we know one thing is for sure, it's better to keep a customer than it is to go and find a new one.
100%.
And so they really do. What do? They put on events? What happens?
Well, yes. So we try to, the battleground now is the customer's experience with us. That's where business is won and lost. So we try to, give them things to go to during the year, things to entertain them.
Like what?
You've been a part of it.
Yeah.
Where they'll come and listen to, speakers, entertainers, celebrities, people that we wouldn't normally meet in regional areas. And you
give them access.
Yeah.
So effectively, people listen to this. I mean, this is a great customer retention story. I mean, this is being done by one of the world's largest news organisations, News Corp, at a regional level. But by the way, this same strategy can be applied to anybody in any business. retention of your customers. So what Malcolm's saying is I guess your business, 13 Management, does this for News Limited, does it?
Yeah, and a bunch of other stuff.
So what you do is you put on events for the advertisers or the people who put revenue into the pockets of News Limited's regional newspapers. You put on events and give them access to people those advertisers would not ordinarily be able to get access to.
That's right.
Yeah, and which is probably the reason you got me to do the thing up in Hervey Bay a couple of years ago.
That's right, yeah.
And so those people there, were they all advertisers with one of the News Corp businesses?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, but not at that time, because after I'd done the Ipswich episode, I went and bought the paper in Hervey Bay, which was not the worst paper in Australia, but it was a close second. So I bought that in, just after I'd sold the paper in Ipswich, I bought the paper in Hervey Bay. 10 years later, I did sell that to APN, who subsequently, their papers were bought by News Limited. So not only did I do it once, I did it twice, and now I'm back in the News Limited
back in News
camp.
Corp.
Yeah.
Back in News Corp. So 13 Management is an events business that manages events for News Corp where they put them on for their...
That's one part of what we do. I also do management consultancy for business people and talk to them about how to run their business better. There's lots of different aspects to what 13 Management does, but I suppose one of the main parts is our relationship with News Corp.
Right. So, but your big game, it seems to me one of your skills is, and something you have deep experience in, is making sure that you keep advertisers happy. Because I mean, if I look at the whole theme going along here is, when you're 16 or 17, there's nothing like eating Smeaton, whatever those words, I can't remember it now, but Smeaton and Eaton, the two words that stick in my head. Your skill is being able to identify quickly what will get a local advertiser over the line. And you're still really doing that in some respects, but just in a much more mature and more significant way, and probably much more sophisticated. But it still goes right back to when you were 16 or 17.
All the principles are exactly the same.
Yeah, just that they're built upon.
Yeah, correct. The landscape has changed a little bit, but the principles are exactly the same. And as you get older and you become more mature and you learn how to deal with people, the results get better as a natural consequence of that.
It's funny you should say that, because even in my Yellowbag Road business, I'm selling off my wealth business, and I'm also sort of, I'm changing the landscape of my own business to become just a mortgage business, because I'm actually really good at mortgages, and because I'm in terms of, I understand that the vertical that goes with the mortgage. I'm not talking about how to lend money to people. I'm talking about all the verticals that attach to it, and that is actually sourcing the funding in the first place. And I was only having this conversation with someone the other day. I've gone back to doing what I was doing 40 years ago, 30 years ago, because that's the thing that I'm good at. And I don't know why I'm good at that, but just am. I know more about it. I'm just more comfortable with it. And what you're saying, irrespective of all the things that happen in between, buying papers, selling papers, and doing the thing at Hervey Bay and then selling that off to APN, etc., you've gone back to doing what you started off doing, which is what you were doing when you were 16.
I'm a great believer in staying in your lane.
Yeah. And I think that's right. I mean, because often we get a little bit carried away. I mean, I've done it. I can get involved in the wealth business because that's what Australians need. That was my view. It is what Australians need, but it's so fucking complicated, like wealth. I mean, I don't understand it, so I don't know what I don't know. And therefore, I'm better off, as you say, sticking to my lane, just doing mortgages, because I understand that top to bottom, left to right, you can, any sort of angle, diagonal you want to talk about, I'm got some skill base in it. And it's interesting, you're doing exactly the same now, notwithstanding all the stuff that happened on the in-between.
Yeah.
You are looking after advertisers who are customers of News Corp, and or probably other people for that matter, and you are looking after them by making sure that they feel as though they're part of a group, and that group looks after them better than anybody else, therefore they're going to spend more dollars with that group. Would that be sort of...
Well, every job's a sales job.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what job you've got in what organisation, every job is a sales job. There's no question about that. So you want to make that experience better than the experience they'll get from anybody else. Once you do that, why will they go somewhere else?
It's about the experience, you're right. Yeah. How do I make that experience better?
Well, it's the oldest economy in the world, Mark. You do something for me, and what happens after that? I feel like I've got to do something for you.
Yeah, totally. 100%. I mean, It's funny, when we go talk to our independent mortgage brokers who are out there who we supply money to, I know, and we had a guy called David Holston who worked in my original Wizard business, and David used to say to me, Mark, all I have to do is go out and speak to these independent brokers and have lunch with them or have a cup of tea and buy them a cup of coffee, whatever, and have a chat to them. He said for the next 3 weeks, they'll give us all their business. They won't send anything to Commonwealth Bank. They won't send anything to Westpac. They'll send it straight to us. And then I know, and he used to be able to look through the data and work out when someone needed to be spoken to, or just addressed and treated like a human being, by the way, treated like a nice, normal person, and no hard sell. No hard sell, none whatsoever. Just go and respect them and spend some time with them and ask them about how they're going. And then all of a sudden the business would start flowing again. Is that sort of what you're talking about here?
Look, I think one of the greatest traps that people fall into is that they get a customer and then they think they've got that customer for life. So they don't treat them with the art of attraction or the vigour in which they pursued them in the first place. They don't keep that repetitive behaviour going, and that's the thing that attracted that person to you in the first place. It's like everyone puts in so much effort for the first impression, but it's the last impression that matters. How much my lasting impression of what you're like, not you just you drop me after 3 months and you don't give me the service levels because I've signed up to a 12-month deal, and whether it's media or it's plumbing or whatever, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Whatever you did to get that person in the first place, you keep doing, because that's what conditioned them to get into you in the first place.
That's definitely the psychology of you. So you're sort of talking about, as a customer retention expert, how do you reconcile today retention of customers when, for those businesses that are all not person-based but are a database, in other words, they're electronic, digital, and there's no interaction? I mean, how do those people must struggle with retaining customers?
It's a difficult one. Most of those businesses are what probably we would term bigger businesses, for instance. So, 97% or something of the businesses in Australia are small business, 15 employees or less. That's the heartland for customer retention. And, if you're on social media, you can build your own community around your own business, and there's many ways in which you can, do what I'm doing and many other people are doing in a smaller way. So, if you own the local carpet cleaning business or whatever, don't think that you can't build a customer retention base around those people, because most of it's communication, and they're really easy strategies. I mean, we launched a real estate business in Harvey Bay 2.5 years ago as well. We're now the number 2 office in town out of 22 franchises, and ours is an independent business, but we completely reverse engineered the way that it was being done in that particular marketplace. So it's easily done, but you've got to stay committed to it, and that's the hard part. The hard part is it's easy, like a bad racehorse, to put your head up and start looking around at other things and forget about the thing that is most important, and that's your customer. So if you keep your customer rusted onto you, I tell you what, you'll sleep a lot easier at night because you're not worried about where the next sale's going to go. Make them want to buy from you as opposed to you having to sell to them.
Yeah, that's a good point. But it is as you say, it's a constant, consistent, persistent game. You can't ever let up. It's
Never.
and it's not just communicating, but it is communicating, but it's actually communicating valuable things. People get a lot of shit today, and especially digitally, and to some extent, we spend 3 or 4 seconds on most things. Especially things like Instagram. So we have to give them some reason to stay there for a second or two, a few seconds longer. We have to really think about the content and make sure it's valuable. There has to be value in what it is I'm reading from you if I'm interacting with you.
It does. It needs to be a value proposition. But the other thing which I talk to people about a lot is that if you're competing with me, it's a prize fight. And it's going to go all of the way to the end until one of us can't continue. There's no point in saying, I'm just going to try this for a while and see how it goes. You've got to be committed to it. And that's when you get the results in the end.
I always use that story. David and Joseph, they're in the jungle and there's a tiger coming towards them, and David says to Joseph, wow, there's a tiger coming towards them. We're in big trouble here. And Joseph looks at David and says, mate, all I have to do is run faster than you. And what you're saying is, you're saying precisely that. You're saying you have to be better than your opposition. So it is important to know what your opposition is doing in terms of how they interact with the customers. You have to do that plus more. You have to be more committed. It's a fascinating environment, customer retention and customer care. Customer acquisition is equally fascinating, but the retention piece is really important. I mean, our biggest organisations in this country are very poor at it. Banks, for example, are very, very poor at it. I don't know whether it's because they've got too many customers, but they're just average at it, very, very average. And maybe because they've got monopolies or, the oligopolies, and they know that there's 500,000 customers and they've only got to go to 4 places. So if I lose some, I gain some. Like it's a bit of a mathematical game, and they just play it that way. But when you're running a small business, every customer's gold. You can't afford to lose any.
And in that case, I think where most people get it wrong is they think it's all about price, and it's actually got nothing to do with price at all.
Yeah, that's an interesting.
Nothing to do with price.
That's interesting. It's a bad interaction. Well, Malcolm, we're running short of time. I'd love to talk to you more about customer retention, because I think it's one of the most important topics for small business owners, and one of the topics that most small business owners don't understand. They understand the skill that's required in their business to execute for the transaction, but a lot of them don't understand how important. There's no point having that skill unless you've got a customer to execute for, and customer care and customer retention is critical. So I think it's been a very informative process. I mean, it's great to hear about your story and how you invested your grandmother's 46 grand, and well done, by the way. I love that story. But really where you've landed today is precisely where you started when you're 16 years of age, back in Glennon, just living with your grandma and grandpa and your uncle and auntie next door. Well done. It's a great story. I really wish you the best for 13 Management. And my mates at News Limited, they're a good organisation from my point of view. A lot of people hate them, but I reckon they're a good organisation. I have the utmost respect for how they keep it together and have maintained their position at the top for so long. So they've got to be doing something right.
They're a great organisation to work for, and whenever people poke fun at News Limited or anybody else, I always say to them, you know what, Beethoven had his critics too. So, and he was okay.
Rupert will go down in those in those categories, by the way. Malcolm, thanks very much for coming in to talk to me at The Mentor.
Cheers, mate.